Is this some kind of joke? Attorney Victoria Langston's voice cut through courtroom 6B, like a razor dragged across glass. Your Honor, please tell me we are not about to let a 21-year-old college girl, with no license, no experience, and no business being anywhere near a courtroom, represent the defense in a federal property seizure case. This is an insult to every practicing attorney in this building. Simone Achebe stood at the defense table, her fingers pressing so hard into the wood that her knuckles ached. The borrowed blazer she wore still smelled faintly of mothballs and the cedar closet where her grandmother kept it since 1987. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on her. The jury looked skeptical. The bailiff looked amused. 2 reporters in the back row exchanged a glance that said this would be over by lunch. They laughed. The judge sighed. They all assumed this girl was walking her grandmother straight into a cage. But not a single person in that courtroom understood what Simone Achebe was capable of. The Fulton County Superior Courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia, sat like a limestone monument to order and authority at the edge of Pryor Street. Its hallways smelled of floor wax and old wood, and the particular kind of silence that makes ordinary people feel small. For Simone, it felt like walking into the belly of something ancient and hostile. She had been inside courtrooms before, but only in textbooks, only in the case studies she devoured at Spelman College, where she had been the youngest student admitted to the pre-law honors track in 20 years before she had to leave. Beside her sat Lorraine Achebe, 74 years old, hands that had braided hair for 40 years in the same shop on Auburn Avenue, hands that had kneaded bread dough every Sunday morning for every child and grandchild she ever raised. Those hands were shaking now, clasped together in her lap like she was praying, which she probably was. Lorraine was about to lose everything, her home, the pale yellow 2-story house on Kirkwood Avenue that her late husband, Joseph, had bought in 1971 with cash he saved working double shifts at the Ford assembly plant for 11 years. The house where Simone took her first steps, the house where 4 generations of Achebes had lived, laughed, grieved, and survived. The city of Atlanta wanted to take it. The official charge was failure to comply with municipal code violations and outstanding tax liens totaling $340,000. The city claimed Lorraine owed decades of unpaid assessments, penalties, and fees connected to a neighborhood redevelopment initiative called the Kirkwood Corridor Revitalization Project. Under this initiative, the city had the authority to seize properties deemed non-compliant and transfer them to private developers for urban renewal. The whole thing was a lie. Lorraine had paid her taxes every single year. She had the receipts in a shoebox under her bed. But receipts didn't matter when the system had already decided you were in the way. Behind the city's case stood Alderman Theodore Gaines, a smooth-talking political operator who had quietly purchased controlling interest in a development company called Peachtree Horizon, LLC. Peachtree Horizon had already swallowed 6 homes on Lorraine's block, all belonging to elderly black homeowners, all seized under the same Kirkwood Corridor initiative. The pattern was surgical. Target the elderly. Bury them in fabricated code violations. Let the legal fees pile up until they couldn't fight. Then take the house for a fraction of its value and flip the land for luxury condominiums. And the weapon Gaines used to execute this scheme was Victoria Langston. Langston wasn't technically a prosecutor. She was a senior attorney with the city's Office of Municipal Enforcement, but she operated like a prosecutor, and she had the courtroom presence of one. Tall, immaculate, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a chignon so tight it looked painful. Langston had spent 19 years perfecting the art of taking people's homes. Her record was spotless. She had never lost a property seizure case. Not once in 19 years. She didn't just win. She annihilated. She buried defendants under mountains of paperwork, procedural motions, and legal jargon so dense that even experienced attorneys struggled to keep up. Public defenders assigned to her cases usually advised their clients to settle before the first hearing. Fighting Victoria Langston was considered a waste of time and money. Simone had no money. She had no law degree. What she had was a 168 IQ, a photographic memory that could recall entire pages of legal text after a single reading, and a fury so deep and quiet it scared her sometimes. She had been forced to leave Spelman 6 months ago, when the city froze Lorraine's bank accounts as part of the seizure proceedings. The scholarship covered tuition, but not the legal bills that started piling up. The court-appointed attorney, a decent but overwhelmed man juggling over 100 cases, had looked Lorraine in the eye and said, Mrs. Achebe, honestly, your best option is to negotiate. Maybe they'll let you keep 20% of the sale price. Lorraine had gone quiet. That night, Simone found her grandmother sitting alone in the dark kitchen, staring at the wall where Joseph's photograph hung. They want to take his house, baby, Lorraine had whispered. The house he built with his hands. Simone didn't sleep that night. By morning, she had begun researching Georgia's statutory provisions for non-attorney legal advocates. She found it buried in an obscure section of the state code, a provision allowing a direct family member to serve as a legal representative in civil proceedings when the defendant could demonstrate financial inability to retain counsel and when no adequate public defense was available. It was rarely invoked. Most judges didn't even know it existed, but it was there. It was legal. And Simone filed the petition the next day. For 5 months she lived in the back room of her grandmother's house, sleeping 4 hours a night, surrounded by stacks of municipal codes, property law textbooks, and hundreds of pages of discovery documents the city had dumped on her in what was clearly an attempt to drown her in paper. She read every single page. Twice. Judge Calvin Mercer was not impressed. He was a large man with heavy-lidded eyes and a reputation for efficiency, which in practice meant he didn't like surprises, didn't like delays, and particularly didn't like amateurs cluttering up his courtroom. He had approved Simone's petition only because the statute gave him no choice, but he made his feelings clear from the bench. "Miss Achebe," Judge Mercer said on the first day of the hearing, peering down at her over his reading glasses, "I have allowed you to represent your grandmother because the law requires it. But I want to be perfectly transparent. You are entering extraordinarily complex litigation involving municipal tax law, property seizure statutes, and federal grant compliance. If you are not prepared, the consequences for your grandmother will be severe and irreversible. Do you understand?" "I understand, Your Honor," Simone said. Her voice was steady. Her hands, hidden beneath the table, were not. Victoria Langston didn't even bother to look at Simone during the opening statements. She addressed the jury as if the defense table were empty. Her case was a fortress built on paper. 14 binders of tax assessments, code violation reports, engineering surveys, and penalty calculations. She walked the jury through it with the patient, methodical confidence of someone who had done this 100 times. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langston said, her voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the room, "this is not a complicated matter. The City of Atlanta, through its duly authorized Kirkwood Corridor Revitalization Initiative, has identified properties in severe non-compliance with municipal building and safety codes. Mrs. Achebe's property has accumulated $340,000 in outstanding assessments, penalties, and remediation fees. The city has made every reasonable effort to resolve this matter. Mrs. Achebe has refused to cooperate. The law is clear." The first 3 days were brutal. Every time Simone tried to challenge Langston's evidence, she ran into a wall, not because her arguments were wrong, but because Langston was a master of procedural warfare. When Simone attempted to question the city's building inspector about the code violations, Langston objected immediately. "Your Honor, the respondent's representative is attempting to introduce testimony outside the scope of this witness's direct examination." Sustained. When Simone tried to introduce Lorraine's shoebox of tax receipts as evidence of payment, Langston was ready. "Objection. These are unverified personal documents with no chain of custody. The city's official records show outstanding balances. Handwritten receipts from a shoebox are not admissible evidence against certified municipal tax records." Judge Mercer looked at Simone. "Miss Achebe, do you have certified copies of these payments from the county tax office?" Simone's stomach dropped. She had requested certified copies 3 months ago. The county office had never responded. "Your Honor, I submitted a records request, but the office has not." "Then I'm sustaining the objection," Judge Mercer said flatly. "You cannot introduce unverified documents." The most devastating moment came on the 3rd day. Simone had spent 2 weeks analyzing the financial records connected to the Kirkwood Corridor Initiative. She had found something troubling. The assessment amounts charged to properties on Lorraine's block were wildly inconsistent. 2 nearly identical houses, side by side, had been assessed penalty fees that differed by over $200,000. Simone believed this proved the assessments were fabricated, tailored to force specific homeowners out. She stood before the jury with her analysis printed on poster boards she had made at a copy shop. "Your Honor, I'd like to present a comparative analysis of assessment discrepancies across Kirkwood Corridor properties to demonstrate a pattern of selective and discriminatory enforcement. Langston was on her feet before Simone finished the sentence. Objection. The respondent's representative has no qualifications in municipal finance, property assessment methodology, or statistical analysis. She is a college dropout attempting to present herself as an expert witness. This is deeply misleading to the jury. I'm not testifying as an expert, Simone shot back. I'm presenting publicly available city records that show. Miss Achebe, Judge Mercer interrupted, his voice heavy with impatience. Attorney Langston is correct. You are not qualified to interpret financial assessment methodologies for the jury. The objection is sustained. Remove the poster boards. Simone stood there holding her carefully made displays, feeling the heat of every eye in the room. A man in the gallery shook his head slowly. A juror in the front row looked at Lorraine with what could only be described as pity. Not the kind that helps. The kind that comes before a verdict. That evening, Langston caught Simone in the hallway outside the courtroom. The older woman stopped, adjusted the diamond stud in her left ear, and looked at Simone the way someone might look at a stain on a tablecloth. I'll give you some free advice, Langston said, her voice low and smooth. Tell your grandmother to accept the settlement offer, 22 cents on the dollar. Take the check and find an apartment somewhere. You're embarrassing her in there. You're embarrassing yourself. And on Friday, when that jury rules in the city's favor, she's going to lose the house and get nothing. At least with the settlement, she walks away with something. Langston adjusted her briefcase strap and walked away, her heels echoing down the marble hallway like a countdown. Simone stood there for a long time after Langston left. The hallway was empty. The overhead lights buzzed. Somewhere deep in the building, a door slammed shut. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She walked to the MARTA station, rode the train home in silence, and sat down at the kitchen table where Lorraine had left a plate of food wrapped in foil. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread. Simone stared at it. She could hear her grandmother upstairs, the creak of the floorboards as she moved slowly toward bed. This house. These floors that knew the weight of her family. The kitchen where her grandfather proposed to her grandmother, with a ring he paid off in installments over 2 years. The backyard where Simone learned to ride a bicycle. The porch where Lorraine sat every evening and waved to the neighbors. Simone unwrapped the foil, ate every bite, washed the plate, dried it and put it back in the cabinet. Then she sat down with the 4,000 pages of discovery documents that Langston's office had dumped on her, and she started reading again, not skimming, not searching for keywords. Reading every word on every page, the way she had been doing for 5 months, because she knew that somewhere in those pages was the thing Langston didn't want her to find. She found it at 2:47 a.m. on page 3811. It was a disbursement report from the Kirkwood Corridor Revitalization Fund. The initiative was financed primarily by a federal community development block grant, which meant the money came from Washington. Federal money. That meant federal rules applied to how that money was spent and how properties were assessed under the program. Simone had been so focused on Georgia state property law that she hadn't fully explored the federal angle. Now she pulled the thread. The federal grant agreement, which she found referenced in a footnote on page 3814, required something very specific. An independent third-party appraisal of any property targeted for seizure under a federally funded revitalization program. This wasn't optional. It was a binding condition of the grant. Without an independent appraisal, any seizure under the program was legally void. Simone's hands trembled as she searched the city's records. She went through every document, every appendix, every exhibit. There was no independent appraisal. Not for Lorraine's house. Not for any of the 6 other homes already seized on the block. The city had used its own internal assessors, employees who reported directly to Alderman Gaines's office, to value the properties. It was a blatant violation of the federal grant terms. But Simone didn't stop there. Her mind was moving now, connections firing like lightning between clouds. She pulled up the federal grant disbursement records again and cross-referenced them with the city's reported expenditures for the Kirkwood Corridor project. The numbers didn't match. The federal government had disbursed $4.2 million for the Kirkwood Corridor initiative. The city's official report showed $4.2 million spent on infrastructure improvements, environmental assessments, and community outreach, but the actual work done on the block was minimal. A few repaved sidewalks. One streetlight replaced. Total visible investment, maybe $200,000. Where was the other $4 million? Simone pulled up the corporate registration for Peachtree, Horizon LLC, the development company buying the seized properties. She had looked at it before, but only noted the company name. This time she dug into the registered agent filing. The company's registered agent was a law firm called Langston & Pratt Associates, Victoria Langston's private firm. Simone stopped breathing. She read it again, then again. Langston & Pratt Associates. Victoria Langston was not just the city's attorney prosecuting the seizures. She was the registered agent for the company buying the seized properties. She was on both sides of every single transaction. That wasn't just a conflict of interest. Under Georgia's rules of professional conduct, it was grounds for immediate disqualification and disbarment. Under federal law, if the grant money had been funneled through Peachtree Horizon, it was wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. But Simone had learned a brutal lesson over the past 3 days. It didn't matter what she knew if she couldn't get it into evidence. Langston would object, claim the documents were irrelevant, argue Simone was unqualified to interpret corporate filings, and Judge Mercer would sustain every objection because that's what he had been doing all week. Simone needed to build a trap so clean, so procedurally airtight, that Langston would walk into it before she realized it was there. She needed Langston to lie on the record. She needed the lie documented. And then she needed to produce the truth in a way that no objection could suppress. She worked until dawn. She drafted her motions by hand on a yellow legal pad, then typed them on Lorraine's ancient desktop computer. She printed everything at the 24-hour FedEx on Moreland Avenue. She organized her documents into a precise sequence, each one building on the last like bricks in a wall. When Lorraine came downstairs at 6 in the morning, she found Simone at the kitchen table, surrounded by paper, still wearing yesterday's clothes, eyes red but burning with something Lorraine hadn't seen in weeks. "Baby, did you sleep at all?" Simone looked up. For the first time since the hearing began, she smiled. "Grandma, I need you to trust me today. Can you do that?" Lorraine studied her granddaughter's face. Whatever she saw there made her straighten up, press her lips together, and nod once. "I always trusted you, child. Always." Courtroom 6B was standing room only. The same law clerks and reporters who had come to watch Simone fail were back for what they assumed would be the final act. Victoria Langston arrived in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lorraine's monthly pension. She arranged her binders with the calm efficiency of someone closing out a routine matter. Judge Mercer took the bench. "We are resuming the matter of the City of Atlanta versus Achebe. The city has presented its case. Miss Achebe, does the respondent wish to present any additional evidence or testimony before we move to closing arguments?" Simone stood. She didn't bring her notes. She didn't bring her legal pads. She stood with her hands at her sides, her chin level, and when she spoke, her voice carried a quality that hadn't been there before. It was quiet, controlled, and absolutely certain. "Your Honor, the defense requests permission to call one final witness." Langston didn't even look up from her papers. "Let me guess. Another neighbor with a heartwarming story about the defendant's flower garden." The defense calls attorney Victoria Langston to the stand. The sound in the courtroom didn't just stop, it evaporated. The court reporter's fingers froze above her machine. Judge Mercer's pen stopped mid-signature. In the gallery, someone inhaled sharply and never seemed to exhale. "Miss Achebe," Judge Mercer said slowly, his heavy-lidded eyes suddenly very much open. "You cannot call opposing counsel as a witness. That is a fundamental violation of—" "Your Honor," Simone interrupted, her voice respectful but firm, "under Georgia Code Section 24.55003 and the framework established in the Georgia Supreme Court decision, Hendricks v. State, opposing counsel may be called as a witness when there is a demonstrated basis to believe that counsel possesses direct, non-privileged knowledge material to a claim of fraud upon the court. I am prepared to make an offer of proof." Fraud upon the court? And for the first time, there was a crack in her composure, just a hairline fracture, but it was there. "This is absurd. This girl is throwing around accusations she doesn't understand. I move for sanctions. If Miss Langston refuses to testify," Simone continued, her voice unwavering, "I'll file an emergency motion for mistrial with prejudice based on undisclosed conflicts of interest, violation of federal grant compliance requirements, and fraud in connection with federally funded programs under 18 U.S.C. Section 1014. The courtroom was so silent that the air conditioning sounded like a freight train. Judge Mercer stared at Simone. Then he stared at Langston. He leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Langston," the judge said carefully, "before I rule on this request, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you have any personal or financial connection to any party involved in the Kirkwood Corridor Revitalization Initiative beyond your role as the city's attorney?" "Absolutely not, Your Honor." Langston's voice was smooth, immediate, and completely convincing. "I represent the city, period. Miss Achebe is grasping at straws because she has no case." Simone let the words hang in the air for exactly 3 seconds. Then she spoke. "Let the record reflect that Attorney Langston has stated under oath that she has no personal or financial connection to any party involved in the Kirkwood Corridor Initiative beyond her role as the city's attorney." She turned to the bailiff and handed him a folder. "Your Honor, I submit Defense Exhibit 14. This is a certified copy of the corporate registration for Peachtree Horizon LLC, the private development company that has purchased all 6 previously seized properties on Kirkwood Avenue. The document is publicly available through the Georgia Secretary of State's office. The registered agent listed on line 17 is Langston and Pratt Associates, Ms. Langston's own private law firm." "Victoria," Langston's face went white, not pale, white, like someone had pulled a plug and drained every drop of blood from her cheeks. That is a separate matter entirely," Langston stammered. "My firm's involvement is purely administrative. A registered agent is simply—" "I'm not finished, Your Honor." Simone's voice dropped. The entire courtroom leaned forward. Defense Exhibit 15, a disbursement report from the Federal Community Development Block Grant funding the Kirkwood Corridor Initiative. The federal government allocated $4.2 million. The city's official expenditure reports claim $4.2 million was spent on community improvements. However, the actual infrastructure investment on the Kirkwood Avenue block totals approximately $200,000 based on the city's own contractor invoices, which are included in the discovery documents Ms. Langston's office provided to me. She paused. $4 million is unaccounted for. A murmur ran through the gallery like voltage through a wire. A reporter stood up. Judge Mercer banged his gavel once. "Defense Exhibit 16, Simone continued. The federal grant agreement for the Kirkwood Corridor Initiative, Section 7, Paragraph 3, requires an independent third-party appraisal for any property targeted for seizure under the program. This is a binding federal requirement. I have reviewed every document in the city's case file. There is no independent appraisal for my grandmother's property. There is no independent appraisal for any of the 6 properties previously seized. Every assessment was conducted internally by employees of the alderman's office. The seizures are void." Victoria Langston was gripping the edge of her table with both hands. Her jaw was working, but no sound came out. She looked like a woman watching her own house burn down. "Your Honor," Simone said, and now she turned to face the jury. "Attorney Langston is the city's lawyer prosecuting these seizures. She is also the registered agent for the company buying the seized properties. She failed to disclose this conflict. She violated the federal grant requirements that make these seizures legal in the first place, and she has now lied to this court about her connections." Simone turned back to the judge. "I am requesting an immediate dismissal of all claims against Lorraine Achebe with prejudice. I am requesting an emergency judicial order voiding all 6 previous property seizures on Kirkwood Avenue under the same initiative. I am requesting that this court refer Attorney Langston to the Georgia State Bar for disbarment proceedings and to the United States Department of Justice for investigation of fraud in connection with federally funded programs." She stood there, 21 years old, in a blazer that smelled like cedar, and she didn't bling erupted. Reporters were on their phones. The jury foreman's mouth was open. 3 law students in the back row were furiously taking notes. Lorraine Achebe had her hands over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. Victoria Langston tried one last time. "Your Honor, these documents are taken out of context. The registered agent designation is a technicality. I demand a recess to—" "You demand nothing in my courtroom," Judge Mercer said. His voice was low and dangerous in a way nobody in that room had ever heard before. He was reading the corporate filing, then the grant agreement, then the disbursement report. His face darkened with every page. "Miss Langston," Judge Mercer said, looking up from the documents, In 23 years on this bench, I have seen incompetence. I have seen negligence. But I have never seen a sitting municipal attorney simultaneously represent the city in property seizure proceedings while serving as the registered agent for the company purchasing those same properties. The conflict of interest alone is grounds to vacate every action you have taken in this matter. He set down the papers. The failure to obtain independent appraisals as required by the federal grant agreement renders every seizure under the Kirkwood Corridor Initiative legally void. And the discrepancy between federal disbursements and actual expenditures raises questions that are far beyond the jurisdiction of this court. Judge Mercer picked up his gavel. All claims against Lorraine Achebe are dismissed with prejudice. The city is permanently barred from pursuing any seizure action against the Achebe property. Furthermore, this court issues an emergency order staying all pending seizure actions under the Kirkwood Corridor Initiative until a full federal audit of the program is completed. I am personally referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia. He turned to Langston. Miss Langston, your standing in this court is revoked effective immediately. I am referring you to the Georgia State Bar, with a recommendation for emergency suspension of your license. If I had the authority to do more right now, believe me, I would. He raised the gavel. Case dismissed. The sound of the gavel hitting the block echoed through the room like a church bell. Lorraine Achebe let out a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a laugh, but was something older and deeper than both. She grabbed Simone and pulled her close. And Simone finally let go of everything she had been holding for 5 months. She buried her face in her grandmother's shoulder and sobbed. You saved it, baby, Lorraine whispered, rocking her the way she had when Simone was small. You saved our home. Joseph would be so proud. Oh, Lord, he would be so proud. Across the aisle, Victoria Langston stood perfectly still. The predator who had taken 6 families' homes without a flicker of remorse was staring at the defense table with an expression that was not anger, not shock, but the hollow recognition of someone who had finally been caught. A bailiff approached her quietly. Ma'am, the judge has asked that you not leave the building. Federal investigators have been contacted. Langston looked at Simone one last time. The girl in the borrowed blazer, the college dropout she had called an embarrassment, the amateur she had told to go home. Then Langston picked up her briefcase with mechanical precision, turned, and walked toward the door, flanked by 2 bailiffs who no longer held it open for her. When Simone and Lorraine stepped out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun hit them full in the face. Atlanta in October, the light golden and warm, the kind of light that makes everything look like a promise. A cluster of reporters surged forward. Simone, how did you find the connection to Peachtree Horizon? Miss Achebe, are you planning to attend law school? What do you want people to know about what happened to your grandmother? Simone stood on the courthouse steps, her grandmother's hand in hers, and looked out at the cameras. She was exhausted. Her eyes were swollen. The borrowed blazer was wrinkled. She had never looked more like herself. My grandmother paid her taxes every year for 53 years, Simone said. She raised 4 children in that house. She buried her husband and kept going. She braided hair 6 days a week until her fingers ached so her grandchildren could have what she never had. And the city of Atlanta decided she was disposable. They decided her home was worth more without her in it. Simone's voice didn't crack. It didn't waver. It just carried, clear and steady, down the courthouse steps and out into the street. There are people in this city, in cities all over this country, who use the law like a crowbar. They pry open people's lives and take what's inside. They count on the fact that most people can't fight back. They count on the paperwork being too thick, the rules being too complicated, the system being too heavy for one person to move. She looked directly into the nearest camera. But the law doesn't belong to them. It belongs to all of us. And if they forget that, then somebody has to stand up and remind them. Even if that somebody is a 21-year-old girl in her grandmother's old blazer who has nothing left to lose. Within a month, the fallout consumed everyone it was supposed to consume. The U.S. Attorney's Office opened a full investigation into the Kirkwood Corridor Initiative. The federal audit revealed that $3.8 million in grant money had been diverted through shell companies connected to Alderman Theodore Gaines and routed back through Peachtree Horizon, LLC. Gaines was indicted on 14 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Victoria Langston, facing disbarment, and her own federal charges, cooperated with investigators. Her testimony dismantled the entire network. Every family that lost a home on Kirkwood Avenue had their properties restored. The Georgia State Legislature introduced a bill requiring independent oversight of all municipally funded property seizures, informally called the Achebe Amendment. Simone received 17 scholarship offers. She accepted the one from Columbia Law School, where the dean had written her a personal letter that said simply, "We don't usually admit students without undergraduate degrees, but after reviewing the transcript of Achebe v. City of Atlanta, we decided to make an exception. We suspect you'll be teaching here before long." On her last night before leaving for New York, Simone sat on the porch of the pale yellow house on Kirkwood Avenue. Lorraine brought out 2 glasses of sweet tea and settled into the chair beside her. The streetlights were on. A neighbor walking her dog waved. The October air smelled like somebody's grill going somewhere down the block. "You nervous?" Lorraine asked. "Terrified," Simone said. Lorraine sipped her tea. "Good. Means you're paying attention." They sat together in the quiet, 2 women on a porch that nobody would ever take from them, watching the last light fade over a city that had tried to swallow them whole and choked.